Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
Okay, so welcome to this episode of Trend Detection. And we're not quite live still. I know I keep saying this, but we will be live very, very, very soon, hopefully by the end of this month. So we can look forward to that. But for now, we've got our very first guest on the Trend Detection podcast. Sorry, Trend Detection Live, our first ever guest on Trend Detection Live. Chris, and I haven't invited him back until this point. I don't know why. It's nothing, he hasn't upset me in any way. Or
I even bought a new camera and everything, and then just wasn't invited back.
Exactly. I don't know what was so offensive. I should have listened back to the original recording just to check. But no, really pleased to have you back, Chris. And well, actually, before we sort of dive into the topic, we're going to look at. But anyway, before we dive into that, I'll let Chris introduce himself. So, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so my name is Chris Smith, implementation lead at Siemens Senseye. So I really look after the best practice for deploying our technology into our customer base and look after our what we know is known as the Senseye Knowledge Platform product, or Omniverse as it used to be known. So yeah, really looking at embedding the information, the experience that we have within the team into that product so that anyone can, or nearly anyone can pick up that thing and be able to run a predictive maintenance project on their own. That's the theory anyway. Don't want to do ourselves too much out of a job. But yeah, I spend a lot of my time thinking about, okay, how do we make this simpler? How do we make this faster? How do we make this most effective?
Absolutely. And I mean, change is actually a key theme today because, well, I was starting to say before, I wanted to sort of, revisit our original topic, the first topic on Trend Detection Live, which was about how to run a predictive maintenance project and avoiding failure. And I know, again, we talked about this briefly before, but I think a really good place to start is whether there's been a lot of change since I know you have reviewed the last the episode that we did together, and whether there's been a change in your, I say, either mindset or opinion on how things have changed. I guess that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I think that is good, and I think I wouldn't necessarily have any additional points, but I think reiterating some of them and how some of that has adjusted would be good. So I think more and more I'm convinced. So in the previous episode, I mentioned about don't make a project too small. So not looking at a kind of single asset or a few assets, but actually doing a significant proportion of assets so that you actually have something that is impactful on your business and impactful on your day-to-day work. And I think really what we've seen more and more is that the bigger you start, the bigger you go, and much more quickly. So I've looked at deployments, particularly in a couple in the US and also over in Australia, where rather than saying, "Oh, we're just going to start on this 100 assets," or even 150, let's do 500, let's do 1,000, and really, make this a full cultural change with full stakeholder buy-in from the top right down to the maintenance teams who are going to be involved. And actually, those, it's quite daunting from a delivery perspective. So because you certainly have to think about, well, what we used to do for 50, 100 assets, you're certainly having to do for much larger number. And as I mentioned before, looking how to do it faster and easier, that really drives that process. But what we've actually found is that the amount of success you get, which is probably not unsurprising, but the amount of success you achieve just increases just exponentially. Your chance of finding failures goes up dramatically. And now the people who are using it are much more like, well, actually, this is my line. I have the technology across the entire line. And so this is going to impact my day-to-day, not just in a little silo on that bit of equipment that we hope will fail or hope we avoid the failure. And now it's actually, well, we're looking to make sure this whole line keeps going. So I think that's the first one. Really deploying when you buy control equipment, etc. You buy the control equipment because you'll do your checks, you do your checks and balances about whether it's suitable for your scenario, but they're proven technology, and very much something like Senseye Predictive Maintenance and predictive maintenance tools in general are now moving into that stage of its existence where it's proven. So no longer is it really kind of data science projects, but rather actually just deploy it and get that value. Don't worry about whether it's going to work or not too much. We're moving way past that scenario now. So that's one. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on that point. It's interesting you're saying that sort of that shift in mindset. Is that I get towards larger deployments rather than smaller deployments? Is that a case of predictive maintenance becoming more mature as a market and becoming more? I mean, there's more proof points, especially with Senseye, as we know. There's lots of great use cases, lots of great return on investment. Is that kind of thing sort of starting to feed through?
Yeah, I believe so. I think now that predictive maintenance has become much more part of the conversation within business, especially with the acceleration of digital transformation. Siemens as well has Siemens Accelerator, which is all about accelerating businesses' digital transformation, and it's just much more of a general term. When we first started out doing PdM, digital transformation was still felt a little bit away, even though PdM is a part of that toolkit. Now digital transformation is in so many companies' kind of vision, and predictive maintenance is a very clear use case of that. I think a lot of digital transformation is very bespoke to a customer's requirements, and there's only really 2 or 3, in my opinion, and I'm absolutely happy to be corrected on this one. But just from what we've observed, there's really kind of energy management and predictive maintenance that come up in every business's scenarios. I think other elements are much more bespoke. So that kind of increase in understanding of the importance of digital transformation means that when we get into conversations with new potential customers or when they go into second sites, it's just normal to say that digital transformation is required. And predictive maintenance is a really good use case of that.
Again, that's interesting because it follows where, from marketing, sales perspective as well, that I think traditionally we've focused more sort of on maintenance engineering, but more and more we're thinking about how predictive maintenance can fit into that digital transformation journey, and obviously that involves senior IT stakeholders. Because obviously digital transformation isn't just for a single plant; it should be, there's a strategy across the whole business. So I guess does that fit into the scalability factor? Because obviously they're presumably looking for solutions that don't just work in one production line or one type of asset. They want to roll it out eventually across all plants. So they have that consistent strategy, let's say.
Yeah, definitely. And I think particularly for industries that have a large number of plants with potentially smaller number of assets, it's super important that you have a standard approach to these things, because if you've got large sites across the world but you've only got a small number of them, the chance of you having the right expertise to do digital transformation and to understand what predictive maintenance is required is going to be higher, or at least you can afford to hire the right team in each individual environment. Whereas if you've got smaller sites, people are already struggling to get maintenance technicians with the experience that they need in order to perform the job well. So then add into the mix people who have an understanding of IT, OT, and the need. You're not going to employ that in every single site. So we've had more than one conversation where they're looking to centralize information and then understand that information and then disseminate it to the right people in the sites. So in the predictive maintenance scenario, that is effectively taking data from machines at each plant, and often you have similar ones as well, so you've got an added benefit you can compare against plants. I'll come to that in a second. Bringing that to a central location, having the experts determine what is important and what is not important in tandem with the individual sites, because the people on the ground are still going to know their equipment best, but now you can centralize that expertise that can learn from the experience of multiple sites quickly and then provide the right insights to each site. So by standardizing around an infrastructure. If you can, if you're a completely greenfield site, you're in an excellent position in that regard, because you can just effectively say, okay, this is what we're going to do in each scenario, and connect as you were. And that way you can drive a lot of value, get a lot of experience in a central position, and effectively have those experts. And that is driven by that standardization. If you're in a brownfield, it's what we have found is that is much more complicated, because different sites, particularly with large businesses that have bought, buy and sell entire plants into their organization, they may have different legacy equipment, for their control systems, for sensors, etc. So there still needs to be an element of openness to the architecture to be able to make that connectivity. So you can still but there is still possibility to standardize. You could pick the same PdM product. Of course, we'd love it to be Senseye, and it has the capability to do that. It's an open access. You're not linked to just these sensors or just this architecture. So pick products that allow you to do that, where you can still use your legacy equipment and connect that in. You're not going to have to tear it all out, but see the opportunities as where you can standardize, and then also where you don't need to standardize, because you can still drive value out of it.
And I guess the question for me, and it often comes up, because obviously with all this different activity in different plants, and often plants work very much individual. What we see, correct me if I'm wrong, we have sort of a champion person that sort of draws all this together, who's got to be in this project. Because if you think about, maybe not the initial project, but the scale, as it starts to scale and get bigger and bigger, there needs to be someone centralized, within that organization to sort of drive that change and drive, almost becoming, as I've described before, like an internal sales person for Senseye. But it's not designed like that. It's basically we're supporting them to help roll out further, because their success is our success, I guess, is one way to look at it.
Yeah, and the champion model is well, we like to say champions now. We like to have at least two, because I think I mentioned this in the previous episode, but if someone is ill or leaves or gets promoted, you have a gap there. So always having two people is useful. A champion is different levels, has a different level and different roles depending on where they are. So you've got, as you mentioned, someone who wants to roll it out across the company, so more in a headquarters position. That champion has very different, they wanting to drive value across the business. From a site champion, and it's particularly interesting with the centralized data approach, you're going to have centralized champions, as it were, who look after the system and want to see value because it's something they've invested time in. But there's still going to be a requirement for someone who champions that at each of those sites as well. So maybe you remove the requirement for them to understand data and the insights directly, but you still need someone who is on the other side of the phone or an email, who is saying, okay, yeah, they're saying that we potentially got a problem on this asset. Let's start that workflow about making sure we can find out what was the issue and repair it in case. So we may not have answered your question so much, but actually, you need a number of people who are curious and excited about a technological transformation in different environments, and what that person looks like is going to be slightly different, or the people will be slightly different depending on your setup, whether you've got a centralized data approach or each plant looks after itself.
Just from a purely delivery perspective, how do you sort of interact with these individuals on a daily, weekly, monthly basis as well?
So I think initially they're going to be we want to have those people involved in the project as early as possible. There's sometimes a temptation to get the IT right, get the OT right, and then bring in the people later who are going to be using the application. You need those people right at the start, or at least as close to the start as possible. Not necessarily in every single conversation. You don't want to bore them with the security questions, although some people find security really interesting. So I don't personally, but that's fine. We're all different.
Can't knock it.
You can't. Well, it's important, very, very important.
Exactly.
But in terms of when we're looking at what assets you're going to look at, what data is going to be important, how are you going to use this in your daily operations, where does the data need to end up to be valuable? That person needs to be there. There's no point doing that entire step without the people who are going to use the application and champion it from a day-to-day perspective, because otherwise, if you're involved in something, you feel an ownership. If you're just forced to use something, then you're going to be aggrieved. You can get over that, and we do see people get over that, but you're starting on a back foot. And so that interaction should be as early as possible, keeping them informed and keeping them involved. And we like to be quite communicative with our customers. We like to tend to have, depending on the setup, we might have twice a week calls, weekly calls, but equally we want to continuously use email, or we use Teams a lot with customers, because you can have that instant interaction. People seem to be much more willing to answer a message that appears in their Teams than an email. It's quite interesting. And make it theirs. This is their product for them to drive success. And so having them a constant communication is really important throughout the deployment.
And in terms of, you've obviously noted one challenge there is actually communicating, getting stakeholders involved as early as possible. So what are the other sort of key, or the main challenges that need to be overcome to sort of deploy predictive maintenance successfully and at scale, I should say?
Yeah, so I used to talk about technical a lot. I don't worry too much about technical hurdles anymore. I think in some ways it will happen. You will get connected. It's very exceedingly rare that doesn't happen. There are things that could be sped up, and one of the things that we work a lot within Senseye, and we work a lot with the product team, is to make that as quick as possible, because you don't want people to lose interest. If it takes you 9 months to get deployed, that's a long time to go from initial excitement to wait to actually something happening. We want to keep getting it lower and lower and lower. It's generally, it is ensuring ultimately that the business value is seen, and that if you can show value to your business, then all the other hurdles kind of will be resolved in order to get that, or will have the push in order to get over that resolution. If you're saving 10 times return on investment, the fact that it's difficult to connect, you will put effort in to make it easier. If you're not seeing any value, that becomes, then that inability to connect certain assets is just going to be a blocker. If you've got value, you turn a blocker into a hurdle. If you've got no value, it just remains a blocker. And so when we're in conversations about deployments, we're looking for those assets that are going to drive some value. So either that is going to be by doing whole lines, for example, because then you've got full visibility, you can start looking at how you change your maintenance practices, or you're looking for the assets that do hurt on a regular basis. When I say asset, I mean a number of machines, like a particular fleet, etc. Because then, rather than being the most critical assets, which may never fail, so you may never see the value, or the assets that are easy to detect stuff on, but actually you don't really care if they do fail or not. It's that sweet spot, finding those machines that are going to give you regular value, and also moving as quickly as possible to changing maintenance practice rather than just relying on avoiding downtime. Because effectively, when you're avoiding downtime, you're rolling a dice. And as you get better at predictive maintenance, the amount of times that dice rolls in your favor is going to actually lower, because your equipment's going to be in a healthier state. And what you don't want to get to the situation is that everything's running so smoothly, someone goes, well, we don't need predictive maintenance anymore, because that's the whole underlying, but showing that value is difficult. Whereas if it's fundamentally changing your maintenance practices and you're removing unnecessary costs within there, unnecessary equipment usage, unnecessary third-party checks, etc. That's what we like to call bankable wins. Things that you're just going to keep bringing in, and you're getting that return investment. And then the odd time that that dice is rolled and you get your double six or whatever it might be, and you avoid a massive failure, then it's the cherry on top. It's the thing that makes the headlines, but the thing that actually drives the value is that change of maintenance culture.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, and this might be a very oversimplification, and I'm in marketing, so you got to forgive me for that. But is a lot of this, what I'm hearing, is a lot of this down to sort of momentum building? So you get a win. I'm not saying quick or too early or really early, but the wins sort of add up, and it's not about, like I say, the big headline stuff. There's also other, wins that sort of support that as well. I mean, maybe you could detail some of those, just examples of some of those other success factors, not just the big, the big headline stuff, but the other stuff that helps build that business case, let's say.
Yeah, I think momentum is huge, and now we're in Siemens. There's a lot of talk about accelerator and about accelerating people's digital transformation. And I think one thing is about getting value within 5 seconds of opening a product. I think with predictive maintenance, we'd love it to be that quick. It's a nice challenge to have in your back of the mind. How do you get it to 5 seconds? Maybe we'll get to 5 minutes. But yeah, I think what's interesting about using the term accelerator is it's also that feeling of momentum moving forward and getting faster and faster. And it's the same with, if you deploy well, you deploy quickly, and suddenly you're actually up and running within, say, 2 months. From purchase order through to or project kickoff up to you're getting live streaming, and it only took you 2 months. That's relatively rapid. If you compare that to putting in a new line or what it might have taken to used to take, and personally, I want to get that down even faster. I want it to be a month. Okay, so we're now connected and up and running in 2 months, and say you allocated 6 months or 12 months to this deployment. You've now got quite a long run through in order to see potential failures. And then, so the next thing you may look at is your fleet. And this is something, and doing a fleet analytics around, based on today, how are my assets comparing to one another? Because if you're looking for failures occurring and you only have itself to compare, then you're effectively looking for change, and change takes time. Whereas if you can take a snapshot today and say, well, actually, that fan is running 3 times as high a current, that's a bit of an exaggeration, it does happen, 3 times the amount of current than everything else in the fleet, we'll go check that. And you go find, and it's actually a worn out bearing, or something's getting caught in the propeller, or something along those lines. And actually, so then you've gone from, we're going to do this, we're connected in 2 months, within a week later, you've done some maintenance and avoided a downtime. Okay, fantastic. That's good. And then then when things start to change, you say, oh, actually, there's some issues here. And they may not always be big failures. Sometimes we have the case where someone forgot to turn the fans off during a scheduled downtime, for example, but just proofs that the technology is doing what you expect it to do within the first few weeks. And with all that momentum means people say, okay, I can now see where this is going. I now feel like I've got a product that can back me up to tell me when issues are going to arise. But okay, we've got our next scheduled downtime and we're going to go check those bearings. Well, we've now got vibration sensors on all these, which are going to tell us if that bearing is getting worse. Okay, so perhaps we don't need to swap that bearing out then, because we know it's going to last longer, or we're not going to do particular maintenance checks, so we can reduce our maintenance requirement. And you do that. And so you're starting to, hopefully this is starting to see you're gathering value. Whereas if that first bit took 6 months and then you didn't see anything for another 6 months, and then people lose interest, it's, they've moved on to the next deployment. The people who deployed it, they're often in kind of headquarters positions, they're on to their next initiative, etc. And you've lost interest and lost momentum. But you can start to see where this is going, then it can carry you through.
No, really interesting. And I guess I see that we're nearing the end, but what I wanted to touch on as well is we obviously have our knowledge platform, formerly Omniverse, which helps to tie a lot of these themes together and creates that sort of structured approach. And I know a lot of work's gone into it in terms of learnings, both successes and where it's not got quite as well. So maybe you could just give if I could speak, a bit of background on that, Chris, and how that's benefiting you from delivery and ultimately customers as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I'd love to say it was my idea originally, but that would be a lie. But I was involved in the initial team who kind of put it together. So it was from delivery. It was effectively the image that doing deployments and the success rate is not necessarily as high as we'd like it to be. That's the nice political way to put it. And really, we can see why, because we see a number of deployments. We see where they're starting to go wrong, and we're building up this kind of internal understanding of why it's going wrong. And can I just check now? Can you hear the Hoover?
No, I can't actually.
Okay, cool. We'll have to redo this one.
That's all right. No, that's all right.
I'm going to shut the door. Hang on.
That's all right. We can cut this bit.
Right, I'm back. I don't want to ask that question again.
Yeah. So Senseye Knowledge Platform.
Yeah. So what I would love to say it was my own idea. But I was part of the original team that kind of put Senseye Knowledge Platform together. If I keep referring to it Omniverse, I do apologise. That was its old name.
That's okay. It's ingrained in your head.
It's ingrained. It's in my DNA now.
Exactly.
But the idea was we've seen all these projects that were not going anywhere, or even were stopping because of a lack of engagement, lack of value, lack of just general, effectively lack of value drive, fundamentally, or lack of engagement from higher stakeholders. And sorry, now my son's just come in.
That's all right.
We will get. What's up, bud?
That's all right.
Oh dear. We're so close now on the last question.
Oh no,
like...
no.
Yeah, Danny's doing an interview at the moment. You and me okay? Yeah. It's like that BBC incident where the kids came in there.
Yeah, and the nanny sort of desperately trying to.
It was his wife, wasn't it?
Oh, was your wife? Sorry.
Yeah, it was his wife. Yeah, I know that feeling. Thank you, Robin. Right, Omniverse.
Right. Yes, knowledge platform.
Should I say the same joke 3 times?
Yeah, go on. It gets more funny. It gets more funny.
It gets more funny. I used to do anyway. Story. Yeah, so Omniverse, or Senseye Knowledge Platform, as we should refer to it. So I wish it was my idea, and I'd love to claim it, but that would be a lie. Effectively, it was birthed by the fact that we were seeing deployments not succeed, or that's the political way of saying failing, due to a number of factors, and the number of successful projects was not as high as we wanted it to be. And it was recognizing that we were learning a huge amount from all these different deployments, and the failure points were not always the same, but it generally came down to a lack of engagement and a lack of value. Not so much technical. Technical did come up, but we could see that could be resolved with time. So we need to consider technical and give guidance around that, but we can get better. That's in some ways easy to get better and better and better. But the value and the engagement was particularly important. And so really it came about of bringing that information together so that we had an internal pool of information that we could look at and learn from. But equally, we thought, well, actually, if we provide this to potential partners who would like to deploy Senseye Predictive Maintenance, or even sample and give some of it to customers without overwhelming them, is actually they can now see that what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve. So there's not like a mist or a fog in the future as to where we're going. Once you got it connected, then what? We want to start on the right foot with all the right stakeholders involved and making sure we're concentrating on places that are going to generate value. So really, that's what why it came about. We put it together in a platform, and then we use it all the time as a perfect reference guide. It was originally planned to be much more of a do it all, see it all within one platform. So you would literally do the whole deployment within the platform. But we actually very quickly realized that every environment is different from a communications perspective. Some people like email, some people like Teams, some people want their kind of information just to stick within their organization, and we come in, some want to send over. So we were never going to get the platform to do everything that we wanted it to, and the overheads would be huge. But the information itself is really important. And so really it looks after 5 main steps, which is scoping out your deployment correctly. So looking after, have you got the right people involved? Have you got the right place involved? And what are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve? Where are you going to drive value? So you're not just trying out technology, you're looking to make a business impact. And then using what we call design, which is to then bring all the elements together that you need in order to have a successful deployment, which would be selecting those correct assets. So I mentioned previously, making sure that the assets you select are going to give you value in the medium-term future. Short-term, perfect; medium, more likely. So not necessarily your most critical assets. That's more long-term value. Still valuable to have, and if you've got if you've bought a site license, for example, bring them on in. But concentrate on those ones that actually we really need to avoid these failures, and they're happening to us. Data selection, which is around making sure that which assets you're wanting to monitor. The data is very much around collecting the right data. Operating context and usage, making sure you've got the right people involved who are going to use it, understand how they're going to use it, who are they going to report to, the wins and the things that need improving, and how do you build the support structure, the IT, OT support structure around them. And then finally, connectivity, which is how are you going to connect from your machines up to our solution. And actually that bit's really interesting now, as now we're part of Siemens, is that bit, it can expand quite dramatically, because whereas before we were a software only company and we were relying on third parties, including Siemens in many scenarios, now we're building up more and more of a portfolio of actually, if you have a gap, we can now fill it. If you have a challenge of getting from the edge to cloud, there's a Siemens product for that. If you require sensors, the Siemens products for that. So we're not locked. It was very clear that we're not locked to Siemens equipment. And that's a big important thing to say. So if you've got other providers' sensors, other providers' technology, we can still connect to it. But it does mean if you find there's a gap, then we now have a much wider kind of support structure and product portfolio to be able to fulfill those gaps. And so that's something actually personally I need to expand on in the knowledge platform as well. So one thing to note is we're always trying to improve this knowledge platform. So once you've got it designed, you've got everyone involved who you want, or should have, I should say. It's about deploying, which is the nuts and bolts, and then operate, which is the most important stage, because that's the point where you actually get the value. You could design and deploy a perfect solution, but if no one's using it, it was effectively a waste of time. So operate is how you use the product, how you get it involved in your work, normal work in the day, and getting value out of it. And then we have a final section, which is refine, which is the fact that often with these things you made traditionally as well, with a lot of installation of equipment or lines, etc., from the manufacturer, it's very much a kind of fit and forget. We wanted to move away from that model. We, as a business, what we want to have is that we're kind of there in the wings, ready to support improving and finding issues with the deployment, and kind of have that iterative approach. And that's what the refine element of is. Refine is very much around looking back at your deployment and looking forward to where you want to go to see what gaps are we missing, what needs to improving, and where to next. What plant, what line, who needs to be communicated with, etc. And so that you can see a full journey through to getting your value and then starting to drive even more value in the future.
And a lot of these stages, I guess, well, like you said, they're delivered. I guess that's the great thing. They're delivered in the way that the customer wants them delivered. Is it email communication? Is it regular meetings? It could be a mix of everything as well, I guess, as well. So we say a step-by-step approach, but the approach obviously has to account for different customers, different industries, different technologies involved, different connectivity options, etc.
Yeah, and it's very much designed much like our product is, in terms of it needs to be agnostic to the industry and agnostic to the data that it receives. And so that's what we try to achieve with the knowledge platform as well. And the information that you find there is that it is effectively a set of principles in order to follow. So it's not going to tell you in oil and gas or in the wind industry, etc., exactly for your wind turbine Mark 2.791, etc. This is the data you need. It kind of takes a step back from that and says, well, actually, let's look at this from a fundamental perspective of break down your wind turbine into components. How does that component fail or could fail? Okay, therefore this kind of data, and that way you're not stuck if you then want to move it to, let's say you had a wind turbine fleet, and then suddenly you want to put it on your hydroelectric dam. You can still use the same approach, and you're not siloed, and that means you can still, you can also spread that expertise across different assets. You still need your subject matter experts, the people who really know those assets, but you're going to need that anyway. So let's get the approach right, and that way you can scale it much faster.
Absolutely. So I think we're coming towards the end. I think, again, we've covered quite a lot. I printed out our questions from before. I mentioned this before, but I think I've probably asked about one of them, but I don't think it was required. I think we had a really good deep dive. Yeah, exactly. I think we covered quite a lot. So I'll invite you again in about, a year's time, I guess is the average.
Pattern, yeah.
Is the average. No, it's been really interesting, Chris, and thank you for taking the time out. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll be back on the next episode very soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you all.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.